We're going to make a hem in a garment with using a bias tape and a slip stitch. So a slip stitch is a hand stitch. It is seen on the wrong side of the garment, but it is not seen on the right side of the garment. So you don't see any stitching on the right side of the garment. So it gives you a very clean, very smooth look on the right side of the garment. But on the back, you see these little stitches where you have gone from one section of the garment over to hem the garment up. Now we used a piece of bias tape with that. Bias tape a lot of times is used when you have a very full garment and you need to go and hem that so that the part that you are folding up, making your hem depth, can be eased into the smaller part of your garment where your fullness is not as much, such as a very full A-line skirt or a very full circular skirt. We can do that because your bias tape, because it's cut on the bias, can stretch and relax very easily and continue to lay flat. The other times that we use bias tape when doing a hem is when we have very bulky fabrics and we want to reduce the bulk as much as possible by using a lighter weight hem tape or bias tape rather than making a larger hem depth out of our fabric itself. So we have the bias tape and we're going to do a very basic slip stitch, which is a hand hem stitch that can be seen on the wrong side of our garment, but again, it is not seen on the right side of the garment. To make a hem in a garment using hem tape, you're going to need a piece of single fold bias tape. So single fold bias tape has the ends folded to the middle, but it does not fold it again. So it just has the ends to the middle and then it's flat. You're going to need your hem gauge. You're going to need a hand needle. You'll need pins, and you will need the skirt front number 22 out of your pink pattern pieces. Since this is just a sample and not our whole garment, I'm going to cut our pattern piece in half and just demonstrate how to make this hem using half of the pattern piece for our sample. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to have our skirt right side up, and we're going to unfold one side of the bias tape. We are going to place the edge of that bias tape that we're unfolding. We're going to line that up with the bottom edge of our skirt. We're going to pin those in place. And then I'm going to cut the bias tape to the size of my fabric. Alright, now that we have this pin, we're ready to sew the bias tape onto the skirt. To sew the bias tape on, we are going to stitch in that fold from the bias tape. So we're going to use a plain stitch and we're going to back stitch. We're going to line the needle up with the fold. We're going to stitch across, sewing the bias tape to the fabric in the fold of the bias tape. When we get to the other end, we're going to back stitch. can go. I'm not recording quite yet. Probably my With the bias tape sewn to the fabric, we are ready to prepare the hem for that. So we're going to fold the bias tape out, and we are going to press so that that's nice and flat. Then we're going to fold that over. Then we're going to fold up to make our hem. The depth of our hem is going to be 1 3/4 inches, including our bias tape. So we're going to place that. We're going to mark that 1 3/4 inches and pin that. And then we're going to press that flat. To sew your slip stitch hem, you're going to want a single thread in your needle. So put the thread through your needle, and when you come to the end where your two ends of thread are, you want one end to be shorter than the other. So one end is going to be shorter. The longer end, you're actually going to tie a knot in that end. The longer piece of thread is going to be the one that's actually going to sew into your garment as you begin to make your hem stitches. As you sew and you come close to your shorter end of thread, just pull the thread through the needle to continue making the end that is sewn into your fabric longer. So to sew your slip stitch, we're going to start by coming through our bias tape so that our thread is secured. Then you want to just barely pick one piece of thread from the top side of your garment. So you're actually going to have it where you are just barely picking one piece of thread. Okay, so go under one yarn, and you're going to come through that, and then you're going to go through your bias tape, then you're going to again skip up to the fabric, pick one yarn, go through that yarn, go through your bias tape, then you're going to skip over, pick one yarn, through your bias tape. You're going to continue that all the way across the fabric. One yarn down through your bias tape. Now I started on the left side of the fabric. That's because I'm left-handed. If you're right-handed, you can start on the other end of the fabric and stitch in that direction. Again, one yarn and down through your bias tape. Now this is called a slip stitch because you can actually see your hem stitches once they are put in. You're slipping over to the next section of your garment. Okay. So on the front side, on the back side, I should see little stitches of my thread. But if I flip over to the right side, you should not see any stitches or what we call picks that are on the right side. So that's why you want to be very careful and just pick one yarn so that you eliminate the stitches being shown on the right side of the garment. Okay. And that's why we create this with a hand stitch, so that we don't see stitches on the right side of the garment. Continue just to work across your fabric, picking one yarn and going back through your bias tape. And of course I'm using contrasting thread so that you can see the stitches that are actually being made. But if you were sewing this in your garment, you would use the same color thread, which would make those picks on the right side be even less evident because you would be using the same color thread as your fabric. And you want to make those picks as close to the bias tape edge as you can to keep those stitches tight to that. And you want to pull just enough so that you pull out the tension, but you don't want to pull tight on your stitches as you are sewing across making your hem. And your stitches should be about 1/4 of an inch apart. So when you come up through the bias tape and go back over to the fabric to make your pick, you should move over about 1/4 of an inch every time you make a stitch. Okay, now that I'm at the end, I need to tie my thread off. To do that, I'm going to go through the bias tape, make a loop, come through the loop, and make a knot. And I'm going to do that 2 times. And then you can cut your thread.